Conquer the Noise is a podcast produced by Unconquered, an independent agency challenging brand perspective to redefine content. This podcast is dedicated to telling stories of outstanding ideas and people who have found their way amongst the chatter. Hi everyone, I'm Jonathan Hansen, your host of Conquer the Noise. Today we're speaking with Matt Smith, who's the Senior Director of the PepsiCo Foundation, which supports programs designed to encourage healthy lifestyles and improve availability of affordable nutrition and access to water. Matt and I speak on a variety of topics which all take root in his belief that you don't have to separate business and doing good. We dig into philosophy, poverty, children's dependence on school meals, and how they use Pepsi's infrastructure to deliver on their mission. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you making the time.
Absolutely. It's awesome to be here.
So you were one of the early founders of Food for Good. I'm really curious what your career trajectory was before that and how you landed where you're at now.
Well, thanks for asking. And, I never could have, mapped this out. And I'm thankful for that. It's been an awesome journey. I think for me, it started, as early as I can remember, having a passion for what I would maybe say now is living an integrated life consistently, living on purpose all the time. I didn't know it differently, but in terms of trying to pursue the things, the passions I felt called towards, I think that, includes loving my neighbor. What does that look like if then I felt a gifting towards business? Because then the conversations I would have around a feeling towards, calling towards loving others, but a sort of gifting towards business. I just started having a lot of conversations trying to ask, what does that look like? You can imagine how that conversation can go, saying, how can you love your neighbor through business? And I can tell you about some of those conversations if you like, but most often the feedback was, well, you kind of have to separate that and you do this work and then you can, do that in your own time. And that just didn't sit. I don't think that that's how we're made individually. I don't think that's how business should be done. So with that kind of pursuit and open questions, went to school and into consulting to try to explore like what are different industries and areas. How can I learn and meet smart folks? But to that end, to find this place where we can do business on purpose. And had an opportunity. We started to do some pro bono consulting when I was at Deloitte. What I really learned through that was the power both of business to do good for the long term and how powerful experts in retail inventory processes, spending a few hours with thrift store could absolutely change the trajectory of that thrift store's ability to fund their mission or pricing strategies. And the kind of business expertise that was hip pocket skills for these consultants that they had never exercised towards purpose. So I saw the impact on both sides for the good of the neighbors we're trying to serve and on the consultant and on the professionals. And I was hooked and said, I'm done trying to do this work on the side. What's that opportunity to pursue this every day? And had that opportunity to come to PepsiCo and initially into a job focused on environmental sustainability. And a couple years into that, we started asking questions that led us to Food for Good, and happy to tell you more about that as well.
Yeah. So there's a lot you said that I would love and would love to dig in on. And that first line you said, just living a purpose all the time. I love that line. And it just got me thinking immediately. And I would actually love it if you dug into those earlier conversations you had with your neighbors or coworkers or friends and family about some of those questions and things you were thinking about. Cause I think that can really help set a framework for, success isn't overnight, and our definitions of success consistently evolve. And I think they can help really frame that up and how we got to, or I should say how you got to where you are. So, what were those early conversations you're having? And is there an element of faith in there? Or was it philosophy based? Is there both? I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. I didn't know at first,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I
Mm-hmm.
still feel like, kind of like Socrates, that
Mm-hmm.
the longer you go, the more you feel like you don't know,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of a beautiful thing. For me, absolutely, faith was the seed that was planted, and just seeing what that was growing into and trying to understand how to pursue that. Um, I think the question for me was, it just didn't sit right. I didn't know what that meant. Just
Mm-hmm.
like the idea of having to say, I'm going to go do something for some other purpose. I'm going to go do this job to make money so I can give that money away. I'm going to go do this so then later I can have time to do
Mm-hmm.
good. Or how do I integrate that with wanting to have a family and be
Mm-hmm.
a great husband and a great father? How do I integrate that with, um, I probably should leave the specific example of this out, in order to not specify another company. But when I was in consulting, I wrestled with one of the clients that we worked with in terms of the breakdown of the kind of business they did, and felt
Mm-hmm.
like, 2/3 of every hour I spent there uh, felt like it was not redeemable.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was contributing towards things that in terms of how their revenue breaks down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's kind of how I was wrestling with some of those kinds of questions. And too often, I think the assumption was, well, you need to separate these. There's a business world and there's a nonprofit world, or just go work on staff at a church, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever those different kinds of aspects were. But that didn't seem right. It
Mm-hmm.
just wasn't settled. That wasn't the soil the seed was planted in. It was
Mm-hmm.
the journey was towards business. That was where the calling. I felt that calling towards. And one way that I talk about it now is my questions were around, how do I love my neighbor?
Mm-hmm.
But love is not efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And we work in a corporate environment, particularly in corporate America, where a primary measure is efficiency and output. And those are conflicting. And I think that's actually okay. I think that's part of the thing that I love about business is the ability to have balanced objectives. You're not
Mm-hmm.
just doing one thing or another. We're very complex beings and organizations, and trying to do this work is very complex. But I think for me, it has started with, and the thread that has allowed me to continue to stay on this kind of journey has been to say, I'm committed to that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So where does that lead?
Mm-hmm.
And here we are.
Yeah. If someone asks me, like, what can I do to be happier with my job, between my work and my life, I think I would play back that answer, because ultimately, you're right. You can't live in these compartments and these silos. And as a business owner, I found that early on that I ran into some of the dilemmas that you experienced when you were consulting, that you're not always happy or believe the work that you're doing is the work that you want to align yourself with. And it kind of puts you in this compromised and vulnerable position of what do you do? Because you still have to provide for your family. There's still hard realities you still have to maintain. That's
Well, and
ultimately
I want to.
No, please.
Can I jump in on that and just
Yeah,
say,
please.
I also want to acknowledge my privilege and the ability to pursue it like that.
Yeah.
Because that's not everybody's opportunity.
Yeah.
And I would say I feel a particular responsibility in being at tables where we can help to shape and change systems to be more equitable, provide more opportunity. That I've had time to philosophize. I've had the ability to pursue things in different ways. And part of my responsibility and opportunity is to help to lift the voices and to provide that kind of change to the system. So yes, it is absolutely loving my neighbor. And through that, how can that be something that is a innovative and disruptive force to change systems altogether?
And so I can see how this now is sort of pushing you along and helping you find a trajectory, or at least a way to satisfy or meet these objectives you have as far as of your passions outside of just work. So I'm curious to now, looking back at like your earlier life in school, and you had a philosophy, marketing, and business. I think that's such an amazing combination of disciplines to study, and just already in the conversation, I can hear how these things have interwoven with each other. But I wanted to really dig in on the philosophy and marketing side of that, and I'm curious to how these things have helped set you up for success now? Is it in its ability to question and look at things from different angles? Is it the ability to understand brand? How has it really sort of shaped things for you?
I think, when my eyes first started, the scales started to come off in a sense in terms of my excitement around philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Was the way that I would attribute it. My layman's version was, it was the first time I was really asking the question why,
Mm-hmm.
not how or what or how fast, other kinds of aspects of,
Mm-hmm.
of questions, but the why and challenging those whys was this energy, the excitement of exploring that, and then
Mm-hmm.
realizing how much our worldview then does shape those decisions and priorities.
Mm-hmm.
You could have any kind of say like, well, you're going to know somebody's priorities based off of check their bank account.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but it starts with priorities. It starts with those worldviews and those things that you value. And so that starting and clarifying, what do I believe and why, and what are those values and why? Those were things that I think have helped me to, I think in a sense, I feel like the pursuit of some of this work has been both a journey, but in one sense, like a tree, like this passage that talks about a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots into the stream. It doesn't fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green, has no worries in a year of drought, and it never fails to bear fruit. That's
Mm-hmm.
the kind of tree I want to be. It's planted near the source of that nourishment to be fruitful. But that also requires studying the environment and understanding, how all of that works, and being that student from a philosophy perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other thing that I would say is sort of a thread through the philosophy and how this connects into the work is the great philosopher Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, talked about the term. I may not pronounce it correctly. Tikkun olam. It's a Hebrew phrase that talks about repairing the world, or setting things straight, setting them right. And that idea of, it's like setting a broken bone. I can't make it fuse together, but the doctors who've studied how to set it straight have studied that to see, okay, if I align this up, then it can heal.
Mm-hmm.
What are those opportunities every single day that I can line something up, set it straight, participate in helping to be part of repairing the world. And for me, I think the opportunity then through marketing, through communications, through business has been, this is a place where business, if done right, is generating that wealth to continue to perpetuate good endlessly.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're communicating and talking about that with the right kind of purpose and intent, it is helping to drive that kind of worldview. Like it all connects together if I think it's rooted in the right place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, when you, as you're, continuing in your career, and did you have a moment, or is there an experience or something that was like an aha and kind of started getting you passionate about focusing specifically on food insecurity and providing food for children?
I think one of the early opportunities for me was in college. One of the particular, cares that's always been on my heart has been the homeless. And in college, at the University of Texas, along what's called there the Drag, one of the main streets right by campus, is a thriving homeless population. I mean, it's when I say thriving, it's a large homeless population. And trying to think about how, as college kids, we could engage. One of the things a group of friends and I got together and decided is let's invite somebody to Subway. There's a Subway around the corner. Tell them they can order whatever they want, and we'll eat lunch with them. We ended up calling this organization, this thing, Feast. Family eats at the same table. And our idea was once a week, a few of us as friends are going to get together and we're going to go have lunch. We're going to go invite one of our other friends who just happens to be on the drag. And I could tell you endless stories from those times. What I can tell you now, having been in a space of pursuing this kind of work around food security and empowerment and opportunity, is the skipping past the relational and past the empowerment of giving somebody just the choice. This was totally unintentional. It's just like all we had was like $3 in our pocket to pay for a sandwich, and we had some time. But what that provided was something so much more powerful than providing a handout. The dignity that we were honoring in this person to say, I want to know your story. Tell me about what you've learned, that we're seeking and trying to learn from and listen to, was very different than I think the posture of a lot of charity, which is I'm the one with something to give. So I'm going to give that thing to you. And it starts to perpetuate more of dependency versus empowerment. And sometimes charity can actually be part of the problem. And one of the books that I'll recommend to anybody who's interested is When Helping Hurts, because sometimes it does. And happy to talk more about that as well, because I'm passionate about trying to do that right every day.
Well, it's really interesting because I was thinking about that actually while I was digging in and really learning more about Food for Good, and thinking about the dignity aspect of it, and also empowering and enabling while you're doing it, instead of just, as you said, setting up a system of dependency. And I'm curious, so how are you honoring that dignity now, in the programs that you're running?
Well, I mean, I hope it's something that we're doing every day that you could ask folks that we're serving, and they would say that. That's the first thing, because we've got to honor and elevate their point of view in that. It's not me telling you that. But it starts with how we started Food for Good, which was, so if I can just really briefly, I'll tell you what Food for Good is and how.
Of course, yeah. I was going to do it in the intro. I'm happy. I was going to run through it, but I'd rather hear you do it, rather hear you say it.
If that's cool. So,
of course.
So Food for Good is PepsiCo's global commitment to advance food security, together collaborating with and in the communities where we live and work. But it didn't start global. It started around the table in Southern Dallas with community leaders. And we were asking the question, how can we bring PepsiCo's expertise as one of the world's largest food and beverage businesses to your neighborhood? And in that process of building and earning trust, how to learn through the gracious partners that we were sitting around the table, willing to tell us how many times businesses just like us had come to that table to try to promise that they could do things and to save and to swoop in and to make everything better. What they tried to say, so I'll tell you, for example, this incredible 5'2" giant in my life named Anna Hill, grandmother to every kid in the neighborhood, just amazing life changer. She was willing to be honest with us and tell us. Well, we were calling it Project Hope. And she said, can I tell you how much I hate both of those words in your name? Because this is our lives. This is my life. So to call it a project, how long are you committed to my life, to this neighborhood? And hope, who are you to bring hope? Don't you see the beauty here and all the incredible things that we have? And, one of the things, I can go back to When Helping Hurts in a minute in terms of one of the things I learned through that, but it helped us to begin to ask the questions differently and say, well, what could we do as a business? What are the strengths? What are the capabilities we can bring? There's clearly incredible relational capital, incredible talents and capabilities in the neighborhood. What are you missing? And one of the two of the things that these leaders flagged for us were we need jobs locally, help us to create more job opportunities that can help break the cycle of poverty, and help us get healthy meals for our kids, particularly when they're not in school. And so we didn't know necessarily where that was going to where those conversations were going to lead.
Mm-hmm.
But as they had started to illustrate for us, help us to understand with their own kids that we saw in the national statistics, which were that 22 million kids every day depend on free or reduced price lunch at school because they qualify based on their family's income. And of those 22 million kids, a very small fraction, 3 to 4 million of them, are getting food when they're not in school. But there are government programs in the U.S. This isn't true globally, but in the U.S., there are government programs that will fund meals, 2 meals a day for the summer, after school dinner for these kids. And they're not accessing those. And so then we as a business, were kind of scratching our head and saying, so you've got significant demand, you've got a source of funding, and we as PepsiCo know how to move food into any corner of the country. What's the problem? Couldn't we make some connection between the relational connections in communities, these government funds, and PepsiCo's capabilities around logistics? And our partners were gracious enough to say, yeah, let's try. And that's what we set out to. We are students of, believers in the Stanford design, human-centered design approach. Started with a rapid prototyping, a human-centered rapid prototyping process in Dallas of getting snacks initially, and then breakfasts, and then lunches out to neighborhoods in Southern Dallas that didn't have meal programs. They didn't have summer camps. And these kids, some of our partners say hunger doesn't take a summer vacation, but mom is still working. And so then now the 12-year-old's looking after the 10-year-old and the 6-year-old. Those are the ages of my kids. And when we started Food for Good, I didn't have kids. And now to think that my 12-year-old would be in charge of making sure her siblings get a meal every day is impossible for me to imagine. And to oftentimes not have an option of where to go and not know where that meal is coming from. That is food insecurity, of not knowing where that next meal is coming from. So for us to learn, here's how we can bring our logistics together, but also to learn, we couldn't just solve that, looking at a map in a conference room up in Plano, Texas, where, our office was based. We needed to be in the neighborhood together with the partners to understand there's a big difference being at this park where none of the kids are allowed to go out there because we didn't know that. But once we were there, the community leaders would say, no, you need to go inside the gates of that apartment. And as we did, 150 kids came. So as we learned and built those relationships and earned that trust, then we started to scale up a model now that we have brought across more than 25 cities in the U.S. and delivered more than 50 million meals and created hundreds of jobs, hiring from the neighborhoods that we're serving to source and pack these meals and deliver them to neighborhoods and provide that role model, and then try to make this a really integrated, cohesive solution.
Well, so thanks for clarifying what food insecurity means. As I think it's one of those terms. It's kind of like sustainability, where it's kind of broad. It doesn't quite explain or tell you what it is or what it's specifically speaking to. So I think that was really helpful, and I appreciate that. And so one of the things that is really interesting is like touching on that idea of sustainability. How does this huge behemoth, and I say huge behemoth now because you're feeding so many people, and you're using the intricate networks that Pepsi has laid out as far as delivery systems and technology within the food delivery system. But how do you keep it sustainable? How do you keep it moving? You talked a little bit about how there are government programs that are providing and paying for some of the food. So what's sort of like the cycle of life of what keeps the organization floating and moving?
And when you're talking about sustainability in this case, in particular, like financial sustainability.
Yeah, exactly. Sustainability. How can you keep it moving and running? Again, that's actually a comment to the one I just made. As far as I wasn't super specific on what sustainability meant, right. But in this case, yeah, exactly. How does it stay alive and breathing and feeding people?
Sure. Yeah. So first, I think the first way that I'd answer the question of how is this going to sustain has always got to come back to being relational and knowing the partners and the people we're serving and asking those questions and making sure that what we're doing is right. And if I can, I promise I'll get to your financial sustainability question. Let me share this really fast, because from that book, When Helping Hurts, it talks about asking this question. You talk about what do words mean?
Yeah.
It asks the question, what is poverty?
What is poverty?
What is poverty? Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It's a study that the World Bank did.
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't heard of this study, maybe I'll do an experiment. How would you define it?
That's a great question. I would define it as a lack of access and means.
That's how I would define it also. For me, I have not spent a day of my life in poverty. My mom has, and I've had other, experiences in my family. I have not experienced that. And what the data showed is that those who have not experienced poverty define poverty in material terms, that we lack money or food or housing or whatever those kinds of material, terms may be. Those who have experienced or are living in poverty would define it in psychological and social terms. I feel embarrassed. I'm ashamed. I don't feel like I have a voice. I'm not empowered. And what's so important to me about understanding that is if those who have the material things think that the way to address poverty is by giving material things to somebody, it may actually be the most embarrassing, dehumanizing thing that you could do for that person. And I'll say an example of this for me is the pictures that I think sparked our hearts and really helped us to understand through the COVID crisis that food insecurity is down the street were the lines of cars at food banks, miles long. And what really breaks my heart there is not just that those people felt like that was their only option to get something material, to get the food, but the embarrassment that those families shared of this is the first time I've ever had to do this. And that the best option we gave to them as a society, as a system, was only those who could be off of work, who, had a car, who could spare the time. You had to go sit in a line for hours to get food. Surely there are more dignifying, empowering ways that we can adjust our systems to serve others. So in the U.S., back to how we're trying to operate Food for Good here, we started by trying to understand both what is the community saying to us, but also what is that environment that we're planted in. And in the U.S., the United States Department of Agriculture funds these kinds of programs from the U.S. Department of Agriculture through state agencies, like I'm based in Texas, like the Texas Department of Agriculture, and then through to a local nonprofit or school district or city government. So one of our local nonprofits here, the first one that we started partnering with, more than 12 years ago was called City Square. So the funds go from the USDA to the Texas Department of Agriculture to City Square. The City Square says, I've got 100 sites across Dallas. And all of these sites have 50 kids. Obviously, it's not that clean. There's lots of different variations. And, here's where they're going to have the summer camp. And here's the time when they're open. And we need breakfast here. We need lunch here. And who can help us with this? And so then we, as Food for Good, say we can help you with those meals. And we bid on those contracts at cost. So we call in our supplier partners across PepsiCo. We call in our partners, from trucks and logistics, communications, technology, to bring all of those costs down as low as we can so that we can provide these meals at cost for these nonprofit organizations. And our belief is, as PepsiCo and our capability to run a good business then, and to do it with excellence and with dignity financially, then we can do this endlessly. Because these funds exist through the federal government, and when only 3 to 4 million of these kids are being served, but government has funds for all of those kids, or technically, actually, that's a little bit, technically they're allowed to, they can fund it. If we started to all of a sudden serve all 22 million a day, Congress might have an issue, the Congressional Budget Office. But if we run our business well, we can put another truck on the street and then another and serve more and more kids. And that's how we've scaled to the 25 cities that we're in.
I would say starting with that, just your explanation and digging into the idea of defining poverty and what that means and the perspective that provided. And that was kind of mind blowing in some ways for me. That was just one of those big aha moments. So I think that was a really fantastic exercise. But one just answers directly the question of, how do you make this? How do you honor the dignity? And I think one is just stepping back and one understanding just like the basic principles of it, of poverty and what that means for people. So that was, I'm gonna be thinking on that for a while. That was awesome. And as you've, grown out the system and I think going through the life cycle or how it works, I'm using this circular hand motion because I just pictured sort of like a wheel of it going of everything switching hands and of within the what you're doing. I'm curious to, within the research and speaking with families and working within the communities, what effects that you're seeing insecurity has outside of like the emotional toll of maybe feeling embarrassed or the psychological traumas of that? How is it affecting their health or their growth? Is it affecting how they pay attention in school? Does it cause children to act out? Are you seeing any other sort of effects?
Yes, all of the above.
Yeah.
And we've got great partners. They're amazing organizations that have been doing this kind of incredible work for a long time. One that I would cite here would be No Kid Hungry, the folks that Share Our Strength, and the research they've done around this and how missing breakfast makes it harder to pay attention. It makes it harder and then statistically those who miss meals may perform more poorly on tests, may have more behavioral issues, may have more incidences in terms of being suspended and so forth. And so it all connects together, and not knowing what that stress is like, that kind of toxic stress on a daily basis for kids. One of the things we talk about is we want food for good, and coming out and being part of a summer program, an after school program, and getting that kind of meal to be a place where you can be a kid. You don't have to worry about the adult responsibilities that far too many of these kids have of having to take care of their siblings and to be responsible for these kinds of, because mom is still working, she's providing. But everybody has more responsibility with fewer resources, and we want kids to be kids. We want to help to feed their potential. We're not feeding kids. We want to feed their potential, because we will all be better if they are able to have that childhood, socialize with their friends, do amazing at school, and realize their full dreams, so that we have those artists and doctors, policemen and teachers in our society. So that's what we see Food for Good being, is that kind of investment in those kids each day.
And you talked a little bit about it earlier about, so there's government programs available, but they weren't not necessarily being accessed or utilized by the public. And I'm very curious what you saw with that or why that is.
Sure. There's a lot of things. I mean, to keep this simple, I'll tell you, the school lunch program serves about 22 million kids who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. Get that each day at school. That's when school's fully operational, right? Like COVID, let's put that aside for a second and how much that's disrupted. In normal times, then a fraction of those kids are getting breakfast. So even just breakfast and the logistics of getting kids to school and the way that has been done over the years, where oftentimes the kid who's getting the free breakfast has to separate from his or her friends. The friends may be outside on the playground, but the kid who needs breakfast has to go separately to the cafeteria because that embarrassment doesn't want to go. Or doesn't have transportation, so it's late. So there's a lot of different factors there. And then you start talking about, well, now what do you do when that kid's not there? Not in the school building after school and summer or weekends. And so our question, this was that question that, the community leaders posed to us is, if you can't take the food to if you can't take the kids to the food because we can't transport them, how can we take the food to where the kids are in their neighborhoods, in apartment complexes? Well, there's an infrastructure built to supply food to schools, to have cafeterias and to run that kind of business, if you will. That infrastructure isn't there to get those same meals to hundreds of apartment complexes across the city. not the sourcing the right kind of food, the packing, the trucks and logistics, keeping the food fresh, the storage, all of this, waste and all those different kinds of aspects. So what we said is, well, as one of the world's largest food and beverage companies, we know how to move food. We have innovation capabilities. Our research and development scientists created a cold box to keep food fresh on our hot trucks. We can use this different capability and this expertise, taste, nutrition, logistics, to then take those meals out to those kids. So that's one of the biggest issues, is that the system, the rules of how this needs to work doesn't actually adapt to then the reality of these kids' lives. Further, for a majority of the years that Food for Good has been in operation, we have had kids, we're serving meals to kids in the present, like as we're serving meals to kids, there's a violent crime committed. Bullets hitting trucks, people coming out with knives, people having to shelter and drive away because of gang violence. And one of the rules of this program is that the kids have to eat in a congregate setting. They have to come together to eat the meal. That rule is not intended to jeopardize kids' safety, but the reality is, when you're there on the south side of Chicago trying to serve kids and gang violence breaks out, you're not able to honor this government rule of the kids remaining in a congregate setting. That's not the right thing for us to do. So there's all of those different kinds of factors, and that's just kind of scratching the surface of this.
So the organization was founded in 2009. I would love to hear some of the growth and the metrics you've seen over the years, and now how many people or children are being fed, and how that's sort of grown.
When we first started that first summer, we delivered 100,000 meals. And I remember talking with our team about how many do you think we can do? 100,000? Man, that's incredible. Could we really do 100,000 meals? Fast forward to 2020, we did 18.8 million meals, almost 19 million meals last year.
It's amazing.
And in total, 50 million meals altogether since 2009. But that's just one of those numbers. That's just an output, right? In terms of the food, but being able to reach in hundreds of thousands of kids every day. We're not taking enrollment and taking their, personal information, but, our best estimates are about 250,000, 300,000 different kids that are part of the program on a regular basis. And what's great about that number being so much smaller than the number of meals is that means that we're reaching those kids every day or multiple times, right? And that we are investing in those places. Again, it's not just a meal. It's helping to enable that after-school program to exist. And then now that adult who cares about them relationally is investing. And now these kids are with their friends. So it's the kids that we're able to reach. It's the number of meals. We're in more than 25 cities across the U.S. And when COVID hit and we had to really pivot with some of our partners to say, there are kids who cannot access these meals any other way. We worked with the United States Department of Agriculture, Baylor, UPS, and others to get authorization to start shipping meals directly to kids' doorsteps. So we started sending 2 weeks worth of meals. There are a lot of kids in rural communities who it's 40 miles one way to school, 40 miles another way to the store, the closest store. And when school is closed and they don't have those other options, being able to send them 2 weeks worth of breakfasts and lunches to their doorstep was a lifesaver. We heard that from these moms saying, I didn't know what I was going to do when I got my rent bill. I didn't know. And then I found out about this program and I was able to start to get meals. So then I didn't have to spend that money on meals, and then now I could pay for my rent, and then our family could stay here, and all the kind of stability that comes from that. That program that we did through COVID last year in 2020 with Baylor and USDA, that altogether shipped more than 39 million meals, and our team packed and sourced and packed and shipped meals all the way from Alaska to Puerto Rico. And communities all in between, Native, Indigenous, rural communities, kids who really didn't have any other option. And that's exactly the kind of both obligation and opportunity, I think PepsiCo needs to step up to be part of, and UPS and other big partners like that, to say, we have the capabilities, we have the expertise to be able to get this kind of food into places like that. So let's work together and make it happen.
You mentioned a bit about distance for some folks, and perusing your site and reading through everything, you talk about being able to solve that last mile in hunger, and I'm curious what that means.
I think people can talk about they can mean a lot of different things by last mile.
Yeah.
Here's how I would describe it. When I was mentioning earlier the story of being in a park that's that park, if we looked at the data, said it was surrounded by 5 different affordable housing complexes. Mm-hmm. So based on the data, the residents, the kids that were living in the area, we said, well, this is a great place. Let's go right here in the middle in this park so kids can come out. A mile for a 12-year-old to walk with her 10-year-old brother and 6-year-old sister is an incredibly far distance. We were 200 yards away from the gates of most of these apartment complexes, not a mile. Mm-hmm. And grandma said, absolutely not. You can't go out there. It's 105 degrees in August in Dallas. It's unsafe. We talked about the gang violence or other challenges. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes kids are told, you need to stay home. You need to stay here at the apartment. So last mile, it's last 10 feet, right? It's how do we get all the way to the doorsteps and build those relationships also where folks can say, oh, I know that I can trust my kids can come out and play and be a kid and get a nutritious meal. So it's all of those factors. Logistically, it's one thing to move tractor trailers worth of food around, but then to begin to break that down and get the right amount of food exactly to the right place, to the right kid, takes a ton of expertise from a food supply chain and logistics perspective as well. But for me, again, I see that more from that kids and families point of view of last mile is a really long distance, and our job is to help to bridge that.
So we're approaching on time here, and I just want to talk through one other thing with you before we depart. And we talked about in the beginning a bit around the phrase you said, living a purpose all the time. And it seems like purpose has really been your North Star and really have helped you navigate things. And I'm curious, there's always a discussion of passion as well, and passion and purpose. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, as far as just, what if I had, earlier in my career, I really was using passion to drive me forward. And it was for a very specific thing around the craft that I was doing, versus like, maybe I could have used that craft as a vessel for creating or obtaining a higher purpose. And so I'm curious to like, your perception or your take on passion versus purpose, and if you think one's more useful than the other, or is one a vehicle. I would just love to hear you talk through, just think through that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'd throw another dimension into it, I think, in terms of, maybe I'll use a term like excellence. But I think it all starts with, I don't know, maybe even going back to the tree analogy, that purpose are the sort of roots, and passion may be the fruit from that. Like that may be what's visible, but it starts with that purpose. You're really asking me to be a philosopher today.
Exactly. I'm taking advantage of it.
Question. Good one. But what I would say in terms of this work, I get the question all the time. I just don't find this part of this job or this job, meaningful. And I want a purposeful job. And how do I pursue that? And how did you get to do this kind of work? And being in a place where we've got limited spots on our team, in terms of if that was the one place that people could go exercise pursuing purpose or passion, is just to be part of this team. Obviously, I'm saying that's not the only way to do it. You can pursue that in your life today. Every single person can. But when I'm looking for folks, it's people who, yes, absolutely are rooted in their purpose. They are passionate. But to me, honestly, those are table stakes. Now I need folks that are excellent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I need that person who is an incredible communicator to lead our communications.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, who is purposeful and passionate, who is incredibly strategic and thoughtful. I need that person who is excellent at logistics and innovation to help to drive that, because we need that kind of expertise. There's a reason that these problems exist. They're hard, they're complex.
Mm-hmm.
And if it was easy, everybody would do it. But to reach those kids who aren't being reached, take somebody who can not just do the status quo, but go further to reach those kids who can't, who are not being reached today.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that directly answers your question, but I think that expertise and that excellence is something we can't separate. That's part of us being world repairers, is studying that world and knowing what our gifting is that we can contribute to that process.
Well, no, I think you added an extra dimension to it. And truthfully, my question was kind of nebulous. It's not totally thought out yet. It's just more or less, thinking through the differences and what they mean. And because there's just a lot of talk about always follow your passion, but and I have been, as of late, questioning that if that's the best advice for people. And part of me thinks that maybe it's finding purpose is the best advice. Find that purpose to help, one, give you a North Star. So when you're questioning or you're having difficulties or when things are hard, you sort of can keep the eye on the prize. But there's also the passion's a huge part of that, because you have to care. You have to have that energy and burn to do it. But passion fades, it burns out, and ultimately, where are you left with? I think adding that idea of excellence in there is it's kind of like a quality control, or like, you may be passionate about something, but it doesn't mean you're going to be good at it. I hate to say it.
That's right.
But like you should, if you're going to follow it, if you're going to make it a career, it should be something you're going to be good at, because otherwise it's just going to compound the struggle of already following a passion or purpose, So I think that's really
and not only that,
solid.
I think we do a disservice to those we are trying to serve then when we say we're passionate, but not excellent at doing it.
Yeah.
Then it may not be the best experience or the best service to those that we're trying to serve. We should have the kind of expectation that the very best and the most talented are the ones that are driving the work, serving others, that kind of level of excellence is the dignity that we expect to provide, and that kind of customer service, the way that we're trying to serve others on a daily basis. So this is not a place for folks to come if you can't cut it elsewhere, right? It's I'm so deeply committed and rooted in my purpose and my passion that, you know what? There may be consequence in terms of traditional career progression. There may be challenges in terms of there's not the same kinds of opportunities. There's not the same kind of career paths. And it takes a bit of commitment and perseverance to say, but what do you value? Because if you value that purpose and that's what you're rooted in, then the answer to the question on some of those forks in the road and career path can be very clear, because you've got the North Star, as you said. Well,
Matt, thank you so much. I learned a lot today, and we'll definitely be continuing to think on this and a lot of the issues and points you've made. That was just, really enlightening. So thank you so much for the time. And I hope our listeners feel the same way and are challenged to continue to think about this in different ways. And also just inspiring what's going on. I think it's really smart how you're utilizing and taking advantage of the vast network and systems and infrastructure that Pepsi has in place to merge that idea of business and good at the same time, instead of siloing them out into separate categories. So thanks again.
Thanks for using your platform to hear these stories from others so we can learn and we can be better at trying to advance the missions we're trying to drive. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Matt. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope you liked this episode. Please head on for the Apple Podcast app and let me know. Leave a review, or you can email me, jay@weareunconquered.co. See you next week.